Episode 34 of the Rain Race podcast. It's been since August since we've been here, but we're back, and this is a weekly thing again for the first time since I think January. Not January. Since 2019, maybe it was the last time we were doing this thing weekly.
August. It was during the Indy 500.
Well, yes, but that wasn't weekly. That was 2 episodes we did for the Indy 500. But every week now, hopefully, which there may be some exceptions to that rule. If there are, I will let you know if YouTube gives me a community tab soon, which hopefully they do. But anyways, if you're new here, because I have had a peak in subscribers in the past 2 weeks, first of all, thanks for subscribing. Thanks for checking out my channel. This is the Rain Race Podcast. It's a podcast I've done with my buddy here, Kyle, a.k.a. Racing Nation TV.
What's up, guys?
And we started this back in 2018, actually just over 3 years old. I think it was 22nd was the 3 years since we started the whole podcast. We started doing them live back in technically last January. I did one episode that was live and sort of just phased into that recently. But the good thing about it being live is that you can ask some questions in the chat and we can answer them as the episode goes along. So if at any point you want to pop in, ask a question, preferably regarding what we're talking about, that is highly encouraged. And you can check out everything after the stream ends. Day after, we're going to be posting the podcast on podcasting platforms everywhere. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, you know all that stuff. You can check us out there if you prefer to just listen that way. So anyways, this episode primarily we're going to be doing some IMSA discussion. Obviously, the Roar Before the 24 just ended yesterday. And part of that was the IMSA, the first ever Rolex 24 qualifying race, which we have the results pulled up for. We're going to get to that in a second. There are some stories, though, from the Roar. So that's probably where we're going to be spending the majority of this episode. Yeah, drama, politics, all that stuff.
It's basically what you expect, though.
Of course, yeah.
Every year.
So I guess we'll just start with the results from the qualifying race. Felipe Nasr and Pippo Durrani brought the number 31 Wheel Engineering Cadillac to, I want to say, to the pole. So here's actually one thing that I saw that was interesting is that there was some debate about how IMSA would classify these races because they're races, but they're qualifying races.
Well, so they do go for points.
Yes.
I believe the winner only got like 35 points, but they are points races.
Yes.
It's kind of like it's literally because the comparisons start for a qualifying race when you look at the duels before the Daytona 500. And I believe NASCAR even started adding points to the duels. So it's kind of like this weird, like, oh, this isn't the first race of the year, but like we're giving points for the full season. So like maybe it kind of is, but I don't know. It's weird.
Well, so yeah, it was a points paying event, like you said, 35 points to the winner, and so further on down, obviously less. But it's being officially classified in the IMSA history books as, you won qualifying. You didn't win a race. So that's one thing I saw earlier that I found interesting. So anyways, the number 31 Cadillac on pole provisionally for next week's race. Actually, I should say this weekend's now. It's Monday.
Chase Elliott obviously did all the work.
Yes, okay. Come at me, David Land. One of these episodes, maybe we'll be back and I can call them all live. Oliver Jarvis and Harry Tinknell, second in the 55 Mazda. And then further on down, you have the number 5 Mustang sampling JDC Cadillac, the number 60 Meyer Shank Racing. Fun to say that they're back in prototype racing. Acura DPi. The number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing, Acura DPi. Also weird to say. The 48 Ally Cadillac Racing, Cadillac DPi, and the number 7 Chip Ganassi Racing, Cadillac DPi. So, overall, there are some things to talk about this. I saw some reports. Who was it from? I'm trying to remember now. Some sandbagging allegations going around.
It was Nasr. Nasr went off.
Yes.
He literally went off.
If you're new to prototype racing, this is pretty much an annual thing before both the Rolex and Le Mans. Obviously, most of these guys in prototype aren't racing for the top class at Le Mans, so there isn't, if they're anything, they're probably an LMP2, so there isn't really any sandbagging allegations to be had there. But yes, every single year, if you're not aware of what sandbagging is, it is basically drivers or a team accusing another driver or team of not showing their full performance in order to get a balance of performance break. If you're not sure what balance of performance is, it's basically how IMSA mandates the competition between the cars to try to keep them as even as possible. So say the Cadillac goes on a winning streak, they win 3 races right at the beginning of the season. IMSA might give them a power decrease. They might add some weight to their car. And then maybe Acura starts a winning streak and they'll take a little bit of weight off the Acuras. I'm sorry, they'll add some weight to the Acuras or maybe remove some weight from the other cars. Basically, it's just how IMSA, it's not just IMSA, it's pretty much every major sports car series at this point, regulates the performance between the cars to avoid a cost war in order to get a tenth of a second. But honestly, I wouldn't be... See, this is where we get into the opinion pieces here, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sandbagging at play, because it does seem to be a yearly thing. But for Cadillac to be throwing that accusation around, I mean, tell me a manufacturer who's been stronger than Cadillac at the Rolex 24 in terms of 24-hour pace.
Well, see, it's really interesting because there's a lot of different angles to be looking at it, because he's obviously talking about the Acuras, because, and what's in it, he's definitely, because he obviously didn't name the manufacturer, but he's obviously talking about the Acura because those were the 2 cars that were in the back, but the Mazda finished second. So I think he's talking about the Acuras, and there's a couple different ways to look at it because he could be right, but you have to remember that the Acura teams, Wayne Taylor and Mike Shank Racing, are new to the car. So you have to think about that. And then also, one thing I noticed when I looked at the timesheets is the Mazda finished second, but they were the slowest car on the field. They had the fastest lap time of by like 2 or 3 tenths off everyone. And one thing Durrani noted in his quotes was they've been looking at sector times, and it's crazy. The reason he came out about the sandbagging, which obviously I think is another reason, but he said the first 2 sector times were blazing quick for the other manufacturers, and then the third sector was just slow, which is interesting to him because obviously the third sector is basically the oval and then the bus stop. So to lose that much time in just the oval and the bus stop was crazy. I think the reason that he's probably saying this, though, obviously, is because after what we saw in the qualifying race, I think it's expected by pretty much everyone that there's going to be BOP changes before the actual race, and probably going to be slowing down the Cadillacs. And obviously, it's in your favor to complain about the other sandbagging when your car's probably going to be the one to get slowed down. But we'll see.
So the interesting thing about the Cadillac's performance at Daytona, I mentioned how dominant they've been. They've won every single year in the DPi era. And the thing that I find interesting about their performance at Daytona is that they, with the exception of, I'd say 2017, 2018, I'm trying to remember. I think they had the upper hand pace-wise in 2018, just like from the start. But 2019, Mazda was certainly strong. And then obviously they had their issues before really midnight, which pulled the leading cars out of the race. Actually, it pulled the 77 car out of the race. The 55 ended up coming back later on. I think the 55 had suspension issues that year. But anyways, they ran into problems. Last year, the 77 car was pretty much the class of the field for the majority of the race. And then at the very end, I'm talking like the last 6 hours here, you just saw them sort of backing off a little bit. So I'm going to jump and assume that that was possibly due to them just sort of trying to hold the engine back a little bit, just get the car to the end. Could also just be setup related, but the Cadillacs always seem to be the fastest cars at the end of the race. Those cars just seem pretty bulletproof, whereas I guess Acura hasn't had a ton of reliability issues throughout the years, but Mazda certainly has, even though they're being sorted out pretty quickly at this point. But that's one thing I like to note about the Cadillac performance is that they're always, it seems, fastest at the finish, no matter where they are at the start of the race. So we'll have to see. Obviously,
I think Daytona really suits them though. Like if you notice, when you look at LMP2, this is the first year the Dallara LMP2 with Settler is going to be competing, and they pretty much all throughout the Roar, and obviously yesterday in the race until they pitted at the end and had some sort of issue. I never really caught on what the issue was, but they were leading at the end, and they specifically came to this race because they know the Dallara would be good at Daytona. It's not really that good in WEC, but they knew it'd be good at Daytona. So it's, with that, obviously the Cadillac DPi VR is based off the Dallara LMP2 chassis. They're the most reliable, best in a straight line. I mean, so it's obviously at Daytona specifically, the Cadillac's just good, So it's, I mean, the Acura last year was probably the biggest threat to the Cadillacs in my opinion, but they had issues. They wrecked. And, for Durrani to be putting these sort of allegations on the Acuras after they were so good last year, I think that's
yeah. Well, actually, jumping back to what you were saying with the Dallara, I saw one of the LMP2 drivers, I believe it was Mikael Jensen, who was one of the two winning drivers from the qualifying race in the PR1 Mathiasen entry. I believe it was him who said that the Dallara has at least a visible top speed advantage over the Oricas and certainly over the Ligier. So yeah, I think that they're sort of a dark horse for this race, just based off their top speed. We'll have to see, because that is the first time, I believe, that a Dallara has raced in IMSA. First time in the Rolex 24, I know. So yeah, we'll have to see where they stack up. Obviously, we're not going to have another podcast until after the race here. So, yeah, I mean, that's sort of just speculation at this time. I can't really note too much after that. I mean, the only other thing we have to base off right now are the practice results from the Roar. And Settler, sure enough, were second in the combined results, only behind that PR1 Mathiasen entry. So, yeah, certainly they could be a dark horse for this one, I think. And then on the combined session results, the number 48 Ally Cadillac Racing, notable for having Jimmy Johnson, I think, for most people, was actually the fastest. I believe it was Kamui Kobayashi.
It was definitely Kamui.
Yes, it was Kamui Kobayashi. Put that lap down in the session, won, which was a 1:35.312, and that was exactly 1/10 faster than the Cadillac Chip Ganassi Racing entry, and I believe Kevin Magnussen was the one who put that car in second. Well, it would have been first in session number 4, but second overall. So, two of the new guys. Chip Ganassi Racing obviously headed the Ford program a couple of years ago, and Ally Cadillac Racing.
Call it what it is. It's Action Express.
It is Action Express. Yeah, I mean they have the knowledge, but first time entry for that car.
I mean, it's interesting when Kamui pretty much had 20 minutes in that race. They gave Jimmy Johnson the car for the majority of it, because the whole, if you look at the whole thing, they've been giving Jimmy most of the seat time in that car because they know that he's the weakest link of the car.
Right.
So with the other drivers getting limited time in the car and already setting blistering laps, it's just, I think that car is honestly probably top 3 favorites. I have like 3 in my head that I'm thinking are gonna really be the top guys, and they're definitely there. That driver lineup is stacked.
You know what though? That's another interesting thing about the qualifying race is that previous years when they just had a traditional qualifying format, it was I believe it was 20 minutes actually, for the drivers to go out and set whatever time. They would just throw their fastest guy, and usually, except for some of the Pro-Am classes would sometimes have the Am driver qualify, so then they could put the Pro driver in later on. But actually, no, come to think of it, at Daytona, it didn't matter. They would usually just put the Pro driver in. So I'm sort of backtracking on myself here. So it's actually interesting for drivers like Jimmy Johnson and Kevin Magnussen, who's also making his first Rolex 24 start, to get some race experience before the race even starts. You're talking about a race there that was an hour and 40 minutes compared to if they just got 20 minutes in a qualifying session where they're on their own and they're not really getting any valuable race experience, especially because the track was damp at the start. I'll be honest in saying that I wasn't actually able to watch the qualifying race, partially because I missed the start because I was comatose following the iRacing Daytona 24, and then I ended up going to work. But I do know that the track was pretty damp, unless you want to consider it wet during the beginning of that.
I mean, most of the field was going out in slicks in the wet, so I mean, it was kind of like that. Wasn't wet enough to clear a wet track, but
Yeah.
it was moist, is what it
Yeah.
was.
Okay. So I'll move down through some of the other categories here. I already sort of previewed LMP2 in the qualifying race, but Ben Keating and Mikkel Jensen in the PR1 Matthias and Orica won that race, actually by a lap.
Let me say something.
The results.
Let me say, since I watched the race, I watched
Right.
it afterwards. I sat down and I didn't have the sound on. I just sat down and watched it. But
Why was the sound
LMP2,
on?
I don't know. I was just chilling and watching it. What do you got against it?
Nothing really.
LMP2, it's not. They won it by a lap, right? Is what it
Yes.
says.
Yeah.
It was the best race. It was the best battle of the race, because like I said, Settler and the Dallara, they were him and them and Ben Keating, or it was actually Jensen in the car, but the Win 52 PR1 Matthiasen car, they were just going head to head for probably the final 20 minutes of the race, just going at it, and it was thrilling. It was great racing, and I don't know, I never got down to what the issue was, but the Dallara came in with like 8 minutes to go, and that's why they finished so far back. All I can say, because the sound was off, but there was a guy in a Dallara shirt yelling at the driver. It was pretty entertaining. It had to have been some sort of electrical issue with the car, some sort of probably something with the wheel, something with the electronics. I don't know. But yeah, they had to pit in the end. They would have finished second. And I think the PR1 versus Settler is going to be something to watch in the Rolex. And obviously the field of LMB2 this year, oh my gosh, is it stacked. It is just absolutely stacked this year. And it's so fun to watch. And it really makes you wish they didn't split the prototype classes. And I'm a person that was like for splitting the classes. But now when we get to this point where we have 7 drivers, is it 7 or 8 in
7
DPi?
DPi
It's
cars.
7. When you have 7 DPIs, and I've lost track of LMP2s. I think it's like 10.
10.
I don't know. 10. When you have more LMP2 cars in the Rolex than DPi, then at least when you separate the classes, try and like make them competitive on to each other. It's interesting. It's definitely going to be a moot point on the split classes once, if IMSA allows Hypercar to come and run, then it's kind of like, okay. But at this point, when you have 7 DPIs and 10 LMP2s, and LMP2 is such a battle with such a good grid. You have Orekas, a Dallara, and a Ligier, different chassis, great drivers. The 3 of the entries, I believe, are from WEC, or 4 if you count Dragon Speed. 4. Not really sure on that one, but when you got drivers, we have a bunch of notable drivers in that category. It's going to be so exciting. It's such an underrated class this year.
I really need somebody to explain to me where LMP2 pulled those entries. I was going to save this for later, but you kind of brought it up. They had 6 entries last year at the 24, if I'm not mistaken, and this year they have 10. And mustn't we forget that we're still in the midst of a global pandemic here, where every other series is hurting to actually attract international entries and really do the logistics of bringing teams overseas. So it makes absolutely no sense to me where they got a 4-car increase.
I don't know why Netherlands came. That's one from WEC that came that
Right.
was a surprise to me. I will tell you, Settlar, the Dallara came because that team will not be using Dallara in WEC this year. And because the car is uncompetitive in WEC, they're going to change chassis. And it also had something to do because WEC is actually going to have different BOP, different regulations for LMP2 for the next season. So that could have to do with it. But I know the Dallara is coming because since they're switching chassis, they know it's going to be fast at Daytona. So they just wanted to have we have this chassis. Let's send it off at Daytona, and because they think they can actually compete for a win, which they are, And also the Rick Ware car was finally actually to come race, unlike last year. And this time they have a bit more support with Eurasia and a few more drivers and things lined up for them. So Dragon Speed, I don't think they brought 2 cars last year, but they brought 2 this year. I think, going into the Rolex last year, Dragon Speed still had their IndyCar program. So I think just totally getting rid of the IndyCar program and setting up for this year, I think it was in the cards this year to do 2 when it wouldn't have been last year. Just the surprises to me were the Netherlands team and the high class racing car, the Robert Kubica, the Orland team. Those were the surprises to me.
Alberto Sanchez commented, I would assume since the WEC calendar is 6 races this year, the budget for the teams allowed them to race the Rolex 24. It's possible. I have absolutely no insight whatsoever about the inner finances of some of these teams. That's possible. I just would have assumed that the logistics of trying to send drivers overseas and send teams overseas would have been too much right now. I mean, we saw how much that affected Le Mans back in September with Corvette having to pull both their entries, Porsche having to pull 2 of their entries, and GTE Pro. I kind of thought the same effect would happen. I didn't expect any increase, honestly, over last year's LMP2 field. But I guess it's a welcome change. I mean, I'm certainly not complaining about it. It's just a surprise.
Here's some food for thought. Where was the WEC season supposed to start this year?
Well, we'll get to that later, but it's supposed to be Sebring.
So it would have made sense to stay in America, right? With all these restrictions. That's some food for thought. I don't know anything
Well,
about if that would actually be a reason why, but I
don't know if they would have already had the cars over here, but the preseason testing was supposed to be in Sebring as well.
Mm-hmm. So, just like last year too.
Yeah. I don't know, honestly. If anybody does have any insight onto that stuff, feel free to let me know, and we'll try to talk about it. But that's all I can really tell you for now. LMP3.
My favorite class.
Oh, yes. I have a score to settle with LMP3 later. We're going to get into that. Trust me. If you want to hear my opinions rather than me just reading some lap times off a timesheet, then stick around because this is where the podcast gets really fun.
Read the results. Everybody, pay attention to this. This is exciting. This is good stuff.
The number 6, Mueller, Motorsports America, Duquesne, D08, won that race. And a 1-lap advantage over the number 47 Motorsports Duquesne D08. And then Core Autosport, one of the more notable teams, I think, in the LMP3 class. Obviously, they almost won the championship in 2018 prototype before they split the DPi and LMP2 cars into 2 classes. John Bennett and Colin Braun were racing that car that year. Anyways, they brought the Ligier JSP320 to 3rd, so that's the first Ligier. 2 manufacturers in that class, the Duquesne and the Ligier JSP320. And then one car actually didn't start that race, which was the number 74 Riley Motorsports Ligier. I'm not sure. I'm sure there is a reason out there as to why they didn't start. I personally haven't seen it. Kyle, I don't know if you have. But
which car?
The number 74 Riley Motorsports LMP3.
They didn't start the race.
Yes, I know. I'm trying to see if you knew why.
I was pretty shocked by that too, because that's actually the car that is probably definitely cheating with their driver lineup and are probably going to win. Put that out there right now.
There's something else. Anyways, never mind. We're going to move on to GTLM because I obviously don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to LMP3 right now, and I'll admit it. Corvette Racing, 1-2, the number 4 car of Nick Tandy and Alexander Sims over the number 3 of Jordan Taylor and Nicky Katzberg. GTLM is another class I got to talk about later, but we'll get onto that in a bit. Cooper McNeil, and Kevin Estra in the WeatherTech Racing Porsche were third. The 62 of James Calado and Alexander Pierguidi, fourth place in the Risi Competizione Ferrari. And then the 2 BMW M8s rounding out the end of the field. Philip Eng, Can I talk today?
It's
Philip
Glock.
Eng, Timo Glock in the number 25, and Augusto Farfus and Marco Wittmann in the number 24. Kind of surprising to see the defending winner of the last 2 Rolex 24s so far down the timesheet, not the timesheets, but just the qualifying race there with the BMW team RLL, which, by the way, are not running the entire IMSA season, which, again, we'll get into that in a bit when I rant about GTLM. And then finally, GTD, the largest class of the field again, saw Bill Oberlin and Robbie Foley in the Turner Motorsports BMW win, Zachary Robichon and Lawrence Vantour in the FAF Motorsports Porsche in second, and the GRT Grasser Racing Lamborghini was third. I'm not going to read down the entire GTD results. It's going to take me forever. But some interesting things to talk about with GTLM, because I do want to bring up the fact that BMW finished so far down. Again, you're going to have to help me here, Kyle, because I didn't watch the qualifying race. But I'm trying to see if there was a reason why the BMW finished a lap down.
Well, we're both going to be lost here because NBC fails to cover all the classes at once.
Right.
Like LMP3, all I know is they were so far separated and nobody barely saw them on screen. So
your boss has showed up in the chat, Kyle. I don't know why it's taking you long to figure out.
I don't know, David, what happened to the BMWs during the race? They were there in the beginning.
Yeah, we'll figure it out later on.
I mean, it is kind of shocking because going into the qualifying race, it was kind of like who's going to beat the BMWs because they just look so strong. And
well, yeah, I mean, let's look at the results.
They got passed by Corvette pretty early in the race, and I don't think it's kind of the way you think about it in a 100-minute race. Yeah, the Corvettes, they won the sprint race last July at Daytona, but I mean, throughout the entire 24, I'd probably still put money on the Beamers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 24-hour race. They could even get a BOP break if that's...
They were sandbagging.
Yeah, well, again, that's the whole racing politics. But I'm looking at the combined practice results from GTLM. Number 4 Corvette was the fastest there as well. And the 62 Ferrari was second fastest. Ferrari's always kind of been there at Daytona, despite Risi usually being a partial season entry for the past, what it's been, 2017, past 4 seasons now. Risi seems like they're always there, kind of.
Maybe if they didn't wreck on the pit exit yesterday.
Did they?
They didn't quite Jeff Gordon it, because Jeff Gordon hit the right side. They literally backed it into the wall, hit the rear. They spun and actually backed it into the wall. It was pretty incredible. It was a sight to see.
David's saying most of the LMP3s either didn't start or dropped out early, likely to save their cars from getting yeed, as he said. I don't know if he meant to say yeeted, but...
Yeed.
I did see that, though. I did see that most of the LMP3 entries, or not most of them, but a handful of them didn't actually start the race.
I mean, the Riley, the 91 car went 8 laps.
Right.
The Performance Tech car did 13. So, I mean, makes sense. Joao Barbosa's car was leading the race until they just weren't, and NBC didn't tell anybody what happened with that. So, yeah. Yeah.
Just wait until NBC hears what you have to say about them later on. They're gonna be. I know NBC execs are listening right now. I think it's time for me to settle some scores with LMP3. I've waited too long in this episode. What has it been? 20-something minutes now? YouTube? Are they even
excited.
telling me? I don't know. But LMP3. So for starters...
Well, first, I need to stop you. First,
boy.
what, like, something we need to talk about. What is, like, having a qualifying race in the first place was a big topic going in.
Oh, right.
But, like, what's after it happened, what are your thoughts?
I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
I just don't think it's necessary. I think if you're trying to make, like a TV... My guess is what they were trying to do is make something that they could present to NBC.
It wasn't even on TV. It was on Track Pass.
It was tape delayed on NBCSN.
Oh.
But if that's what they were really shooting for, then congratulations.
I want to know what the rating on that was.
Oh, yeah. But it's like, I think if you're really trying to make qualifying interesting, there's a better way to do it than a qualifying race. I just don't think it really fit here. I haven't seen sports car racing experiment with this, at least on this scale, in all the time I've been watching it. So I honestly don't really understand the decision. I think it kind of came out of nowhere. What I would have done if they were really looking to get something that they could have presented to TV is, if you really want to make qualifying interesting.
I would have actually just aired qualifying on TV, but...
Well, yeah, you can do that, but I don't even like that. It's, I don't even like the idea of trying to make qualifying more interesting than it has to be. You're setting the grid for the race.
It's fun.
Yeah. Like
watching
if you care about it, you can respect it.
Watching the fastest drivers on the team make the car go as fast as it can around the track.
Yeah.
Is interesting.
If they really did want to do something interesting, though, I think they could have maybe tried to take a page from the Le Mans book and take the top 6 or top 5 or whatever you want to do and move them on to like a short... Well, again, the Le Mans qualifying sessions, though, are different because they're like hours long, whereas IMSA is usually 20 minutes. So it really wouldn't fit in as well here, but I like the idea kind of at Le Mans, even though I'm not really a huge fan of qualifying being more complicated than it has to be. I was kind of a fan
It's already a little bit like more complicated than other races.
Yeah.
With having like 4 sessions over 2 days or whatever they do.
Oh, you're talking about
it's already like a tiny bit more complicated.
Well, no, they changed the regulations last year though. So it's actually only 1 session now. And then the top 6 from each class moved on to Hyperbole.
Oh, that's also stupid. I remember that Hyperpole. Got to put a name.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Exciting.
Yes. But I think if you really wanted to, you could have taken the top 6, moved them onto a session, or moved them into their own session, put it on NBCSN or whatever, and then they can have a 15-minute or 10-minute shootout for the pole or whatever. Just get a half hour. Yeah, I did say the top 6, which
There's 7 cars.
I'm aware. How many cars do you think were in LMP1 though at Le Mans?
Oh boy.
Exactly. I mean, there are flaws to it. If it was really my decision, if I was in Dunin's seat right now, and I was in charge of what we do, I wouldn't try to do anything. I think the qualifying race, while it was, congratulations, you got some eyes, maybe, that you wouldn't have had previously. I just don't see the point of it. I wouldn't have done it.
No, David actually makes a good point. 1 lap shootout. I've always said this about every time. Like every time I watch V8 Supercars qualifying, I say that's it.
Oh yeah,
the 1 lap shootout is the way to do it. Like in every it's period. That's it. Boom.
I think that's the way to maybe do it then. Take the top 5 or top 6, even if you're only excluding 1 DPi entry at that rate, and have them do a 1 lap shootout. Actually, if you're doing that for all 5 classes now, it'd probably take a while. So do like the top 5 maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
But I think that would be more interesting than a qualifying race, and you wouldn't have to risk tearing up multiple cars, which was a problem for some of the teams yesterday. Especially because it was damp.
It's one of those things. It's like, don't fix what isn't broken.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if anyone can vouch for me on this, but qualifying at IMSA races is like, as a fan, and then like just going aside from watching it, from home, like at the track, IMSA qualifying is one of the best parts of an IMSA race weekend, because that's the only time during the weekend that you get to see each class out there by themselves. And, you know, like I can hear the Corvette, I can hear the Cadillac, I can hear whatever car I want without being, you know, like without, you can hear it. It's not being, you know, there's not a bunch of different cars on the track basically masking the sound of the car you want to hear. I don't know if anyone else can vouch for me on that, but that's it's honestly one of my favorite parts of an IMSA race weekend.
Right.
And I think that's something that got taken away here that kind of sucks.
Slothy Racing said just have a 30-minute session for each class back-to-back in one day. I think that would be too long, honestly. I don't think each individual class needs 30 minutes. I think at that point you're getting like too unfan-friendly, if you even have to make qualifying fan-friendly, but then you're talking about like 2.5 hours to do qualifying, which to me is kind of, you know, most of the cars would probably be spending that 30-minute session sitting in the pits waiting for somebody else to go out, so...
I don't know, if I lived in an ideal world, you do like a normal qualifying on the Wednesday before the Rolex, and then the Thursday is the shootout, the one lap deal. You do it back-to-back days. You don't do it in the same day. You just qualifying Wednesday, shootout on Thursday, and then you're set. You do night qualifying, and then you take the day off on Friday, watch some pilot challenge, and you race on Saturday to Sunday. I think that's my ideal way to do it. But if I was doing it, I would have just not changed a thing and qualified on Thursday. But you know, we can't all have what we want.
Sure.
Apparently.
All right, back to my LMP3 argument. I just barely got into it, but LMP3 is a problem. And I'll say that if I can clarify in one sentence, LMP3, if it's not a problem yet, it's going to be a problem. Because when I was looking at the combined practice results earlier, trying to look at the GTLM times, all you see are LMP3 cars scattered in between the GTLM entries. And that's not the only problem you have at LMP3. So let's clarify here. For starters, the first problem, like I just said, is that they're not much faster than GTLM cars. Kyle, I told you that back at Petite that they wouldn't be much faster because I've watched the Road to Le Mans races, which granted that's GT3 cars racing alongside LMP3. But I guess you can even look at a European Le Mans Series race if you want to see those two classes on track at the same time. It's LMP3 is, if you remember Prototype Challenge, which you probably do if you've watched sports car racing for more than 4 years. 2017 was their last season, or is it 2018? Whatever. I think it was 2017. LMP3 was at the time I don't even want to say Pro-Am. It was pretty much just the amateur prototype class. It originated in the ALMS, which got carried over during the ALMS Grand Am merger. And basically they were Orica FLM09s, which were designed for their own prototype championship that was supposed to be called like Formula Le Mans or something. That didn't really get off the ground, so they actually ended up going into the American Le Mans Series, where they became the amateur prototype class. Now, those cars, actually, I kind of liked them, honestly. But they were also much quicker than LMP3 cars. So, yes, you may have had some amateur drivers racing in them, but at least they were faster than the GTLM cars. They kind of stayed out of the way for the most part. They could crash and bring out yellows and do whatever they had to do. LMP3, on the other hand, is... Well, first of all, IMSA tried, it seems, for a couple of years to get rid of PC because they realized that it was sort of just becoming a meme. You know, more and more entries died off each year, and it kind of went away. And the fans, I think the general consensus from the fans when the PC class finally disappeared was, okay, we can have these races now without yellows nonstop. I don't want to exaggerate. It wasn't insane amount of yellows, but still. And now we've brought it back, but we've brought it back with cars that are just barely quicker than GTLM cars in the hands of professionals, nonetheless. And then if you put amateur drivers in them, they can be, in some cases, slower than GTLM, in some cases, slower than GTD. Mm-hmm. And here's the other thing, is they're about the same pace, but they're same on pace in completely different aspects. Because while GTD cars are maybe quicker on the straightaway than the LMP3 cars, they are considerably, at least they should be considerably slower in the corners. So not only do you have cars that are unfortunately similar on pace, but they're similar on pace in completely different areas. So I think, hopefully I'm wrong, but I think that the Rolex this year could be sort of a shit show in terms of how that class plays and everything.
Now imagine on race day, if they don't, like from previous years, how they haven't had a split start between the prototypes and the GTs. Imagine if they could still do that with LMP3s in the track. Imagine if we don't have a split start at the start of the Rolex this year. Because they did a split start yesterday. I noticed that. The GTs started way later than the prototype field. So I'm interested to see what is actually going to happen on during the race. But it's, yeah. It's going to be, yeah, interesting.
Here's the other problem with LMP3, because I'm not done yet. The other problem with LMP3 that I have in IMSA at least is that, number one, LMP3 cars already have their own IMSA championship. It's called the IMSA Michelin Prototype Challenge. It's a pretty good feeder series. I like it. Yeah, it is still a thing. And it still has LMP3 cars in it. And then also, what another thing IMSA has is IMSA has the LMP2 class, which, hey, look what that is. It is a Pro-Am prototype class. It cannot be all professional. You cannot run that class with a field of platinum drivers, or a team of platinum drivers, I should say. So now you have a Pro-Am prototype class and LMP3, which is a Pro-Am prototype class. You know, some people may try to argue, okay, well, this is more amateur focused than LMP2 is. You have Colin Braun racing an LMP3. You have Oliver Askew racing an LMP3.
Spencer Pigot.
You have Spencer Pigot racing. You have Joao Barbosa racing an LMP3. How amateur focused does this class sound right now? To me, and I'll tell you what I think IMSA did. I think IMSA added this class to the WeatherTech Championship because car counts, especially at the 24, were noticeably down over the past few years.
And there were less yellows too.
Yes, and some people started to say, okay, well, this is starting to be a bit of a concern if we keep losing more and more entries every year. And I don't know if the pandemic may have played into this decision, because I believe, they announced LMP3 back in the summer at the State of the Series, which they usually do middle of the summer. I believe I want to say they do it at Road America. I'm not positive on that though. It's possible that IMSA assumed that the car count would be way down this year because of the pandemic. And they're like, all right, we need a Band-Aid. We need something in here that's going to keep car counts at least the same as they were last year and 2019 as well. So they slapped the LMP3 class in there because it was already a thing. There were already teams and it worked. But it just doesn't fit here. The puzzle pieces aren't connecting here at all. And I don't understand why. If you want to have LMP3, that's fine. You're still going to have to figure out the issue of the fact that they're mixed in pace-wise with GTLM cars. But if you want to have them, that's fine. I'll allow it. I don't care. Then why did you split DPi and LMP2?
Doesn't IMSA, doesn't the ACO, not allow IMSA to do much with the LMP3 cars also?
Well, they're ACO homologated.
Yeah.
Same as the LMP2 cars. That's
so
why
it's like LMP2 where IMSA just can't really do much.
Right.
To help them out, to make them faster, to not make the GT and LMP3 an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, they're kind of put in a box there as well. So it's like you're putting yourself in a situation where you're going to have problems.
Well, actually,
you're
here's one thing.
Doing it to yourself without a way out.
Here's one thing. I would expect that at future races, it's not going to be as much of a problem.
Yeah.
Because
LMP2 is not going to be as much of a problem either. There's not going to be as many of them.
Well, yes.
There's not going to be as many on track.
But also, LMP3 cars are downforce driven. That's what makes them fast. So a track like Daytona is going to be the worst of the worst, I think. I'm trying to see if IMSA posted speed trap times, but it doesn't look like they did, unfortunately. I was going to see if I could find like how fast the cars were going, because I actually don't have official numbers of like this top speed difference between LMP3 and GTD and GTLM. But
Well,
they don't post it.
I can tell you that the fastest lap time overall in GTLM during the race was a 1 minute 44.7 by Augusto Farfus in GTLM. The fastest lap in LMP3, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. It was a 1 minute 45 flat. And yeah, the LMP3 car fastest lap of the class was 0.3 slower.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Fastest lap overall. And the speed was identical.
Yeah, I'm having trouble. Well, that's because it's the average mile per hour.
Well, average
lap.
speed
Yeah,
was they're still identical.
Yes, but I'm having trouble really figuring out a way to defend the LMP3 class right now. I mean, I don't hate it. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm criminally against having LMP3 cars, but it just doesn't make sense in this series. Again, if you want to have LMP3 cars and you're able to figure out a way where it's not really that much of a problem at tracks like Daytona, hopefully, like I said, I hope that other tracks, they aren't like head to toe right here, or like neck and neck when it comes to the pace difference between LMP3 and the GT cars. We'll have to see at Sebring, but for Daytona, I guess in general, back to my original point, if you want to have LMP3, I would not have split the prototype classes. I would have reverted on that. Because number one, I've always wanted them to do that, because I think having the ability to contest for overall wins was what appealed, or what was appealing for many of the LMP2 teams. United Autosport, I know, is one of them. You know, United Autosport brought really interesting driver lineups when they were actually racing in IMSA. They would bring, you know, they had Alonso, they had Lando Norris one time at Daytona in 2018, Phil Hansen. And they brought Paul DeResta, I know, to Watkins Glen. And, yeah, I really wish they would have backtracked on that decision if they were going to have the LMP3 cars, because I think it would have, you know, you may have lost a couple teams. I'd be hard-pressed to see Rick Ware competing, you know, in a class where they have to fight with the DPi cars, but it just doesn't fit into me. That's all I can really say about the LMP3 class. I hope it doesn't end up being a huge problem in the race, but it certainly has the potential to be. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. And we're going to be recapping all of that in next week's show. Same time, 9 p.m. Eastern, live on GT Rain YouTube channel. Do you have any other things to add about the LMP3 discussion before I move it on to my next big thing with IMSA?
We've pretty much covered it all there.
All right.
It's going to be... I don't think it's going to be as bad as PC was, but man, there's going to be more yellows in the last 2 years. I'll give that. I'm
going to set the bar low, and then we'll work up from there. I'm not going to set myself up for disappointment here, because... Well, actually, I am. I'm going to set myself up for disappointment, and if it goes well, or at least if it doesn't go terribly, then I'll be happier. Anyway, GTLM, this is another problem that I have with sports car racing. I was going to make an entire video about GTE, the state of GTE racing in 2021. Unfortunately, a good friend of mine, Triple Crown Racing, kind of took that idea right as I was in the middle of making it. So I guess I'll sort of fan it into this video. GTE is a problem as well right now, and it's not just in IMSA. This is a problem in the World Endurance Championship as well, where right now, full-time, you have Corvette, you have the WeatherTech Racing Porsche, and you have just one of those Porsches. That's it. You've lost BMW full-time, and unless Reese wants to pull a sneaky on us, I'm pretty sure we don't have Reese full-time either. So that's 3 cars in GTLM full season, which GTLM, they sort of had a downfall that I can only describe as similar to LMP1, where this was a class that was just at its peak just a couple of years ago, when you had the factory Fords there, you had the factory Porsches, you had BMW running full season, Corvette, you had the Ferraris doing the endurance races, or at least some of the endurance races. I think that was the peak of GTE racing worldwide. I look back to Le Mans too. If you look at Le Mans from 2018 or 2019, GTE racing was just top dog there. Seriously, in the entire field,
as well.
the entire field, it was top dog. And the downfall of GTE in the past couple of seasons has just been astounding to me. Because, nice voice crack. I think that's the first one since we came back. When you look, I'm going to bring this number back. 3 full-time GTE entries in IMSA, and in the World Endurance Championship is 4, because the World Endurance Championship is going to have Porsche running full-time over there still, and Ferrari, because Aston Martin just announced their exit a couple of weeks ago. So they're going to need to do something about GTE. And what scares me is I don't know if they're going to be so quick to do it for one reason. And it's that the GTE AM in the World Endurance Championship, which it's important to note that this is the World Endurance Championship, because who controls the GTE regulations? The ACO. Who controls the World Endurance Championship? The ACO. It's not as much of a problem over there because, well, they have one more full-time GTE Pro entry, if you really want to count that. But they also have GTE AM, which right now GTE AM is still a very promising class. I'm trying to think if it's the most populated class in this upcoming season of the World Endurance Championship. I think it is. So GTE AM is not a problem at all right now. In fact, they're doing really well. It's just the pro categories that are a problem. And that's weird that the pro categories are struggling in a formula that's designed for pros. But they're certainly going to have to think of something to do with GTE. And I think my gut instinct always goes to convergence with GT3. Because convergence, as it appears, works in sports car racing. Who would have thought? You know, when you look at LMDH, which is obviously... Yes. The joint prototype regulations between IMSA and the World Endurance Championship, they're really looking promising right now. I mean, they have Audi confirmed, Porsche confirmed at the moment. We're just talking about confirmed entries. And then you have up to a dozen more that are interested. So I think that that's going to be the way they have to go with GTE as well. And I was just talking to some of my teammates about this during the iRacing Daytona 24. And what they could do, I think, is if you can merge GTE and GT3 cars to be on a similar performance level, I think what you could do is you make the air restrictor on the Pro class a little bit larger, so they have a little bit more power, and maybe strip ABS off the Pro cars. And that's it. I think if you do that, you have enough of a difference between the Pro and the AM cars to make it worth your time. And that would absolutely increase car counts, tenfold probably, worldwide for both IMSA and the World Endurance Championship. In fact, I think, if you want to talk about having a struggle to meet grid requirements, I think that would have been the way to do it. I think you should have realized that GTE could have been a problem, and I would have just done that change. Granted, IMSA kind of has their hands tied because of the ACO and everything with the GTLM cars. Another notable thing I have about that is that the new boss of GM Motorsports just a couple of weeks ago said that they're shifting their focus towards LMDH and GT3, which makes me think that there is a Corvette GT3 car somewhere in the future. I don't know if it's a Corvette GT3 car that they intended on running alongside the GTE, but I can't imagine it is. I think what Corvette is probably doing, or what GM is considering, is that GTE is going to be met with a similar fate like LMP1 was, and they're going to make a GT3 car, which, to be fair, they could probably carry over most of the C8R.
Yeah.
And just modify it and make a GT3 car. And I think that would be the best move for them. You have a car now you can run. If you really want, you can run it in the Bathurst 12 hours, the Nürburgring 24, Spa 24, any GT3 car or any GT3 race around the world. The problem with
You could
GT,
even sell it as well.
sure, yeah, make customer entries with it. Fans would love it. Fans love the Labra Corvette C7R that we haven't seen in a few years, unfortunately. I think that would be the way to go. This is really a dream world here that I'm talking about. People have been saying for the past 5 years maybe that we should merge GTE and GT3. I know some people who are against it, and I know the people who are against it are generally saying, oh, but GTE is more, technical focused. It's more, it has less driver aids. I already gave my solution to that. I think that you can really just modify the cars, make a pro class, make an AM class, and increase the car counts and potentially both. You don't even have to raise the car costs. If you're scared of shying away some of the AM entries, just by increasing the car costs, then you don't even have to. Keep GT3 the way it is right now and sort of adapt the GT3 Pro, if you will, cars to it. And maybe you're going to spend a little bit of money modifying them. Certainly nothing much. If you do some sort of merger, what you cannot do is something like the 2014 IMSA merger, where the DP cars that were famous for being really cheap and really easy to run all of a sudden have to adapt to like almost LMP levels of downforce to the point where they're really expensive and they're not worth their time anymore, which is why DP died. So if you want to do that, certainly you can't go down that route. You have to find a way to make it economical. But I already see some people commenting on this whole thing, and I want to get to some of these. Alberto Sanchez said, Le Mans a couple years ago, GT Pro had four GTs, 4 Porsches, 3 Ferraris, 2 Corvettes, and 2 Aston Martins. Yeah, exactly. And that's 2019 you're talking right there. And now we're going into 2021, and they have, maybe we'll see Corvette back at Le Mans this year. We'll see. It's still, I don't think the whole pandemic situation has changed that much compared to last September. We'll have to see what it looks like in June, if they even end up running Le Mans in June. But yeah, that shows how much, not LMP, how much GTE racing has fallen in just a couple of years. And it's really a domino effect, because I've brought up before that this is similar to LMP1, where the less entrants and the less appealing a class is to the fans, I think the less appealing it becomes to the manufacturers. So if one manufacturer pulls out of a formula, and then another manufacturer says, oh, well, you know what? This is kind of like expensive to not get a ton of competition or exposure. We're just going to leave as well. You just set off the entire chain there, and everybody's going to follow suit. So you really have to find a way to keep everything stable there. David said, literally all you have to do is tell Corvette to make a GT3. Yeah, everybody else who runs GTE has a GT3 car, so pretty much, yeah. I would assume they would try to make a way to differentiate the pro cars and the AM cars. I already gave my idea on how you could do that with minimal cost upgrades whatsoever. That's what I would advise, or that's what in a dream world I would do.
The one thing I never really understood about the GT3 to GTE was like, why is Ferrari is pretty much the only manufacturer to my knowledge to build a car that is like literally the same car, and you can transfer it over and run either category. Like the WeatherTech car that ran in AM was literally the same car that raced in IMSA and GTD and GT3. Why aren't more manufacturers building cars, the same cars, that they can sell to run in either category, is what I will never understand.
Yeah, I don't know, honestly. But that's what I have to say right there is Pro GT racing in forms of GTE right now is not going to survive. And if you put your hands in your pockets and say, oh, we'll fix it down the road, then you're really going to end up with a situation, I think, like LMP1, where Toyota were the only manufacturer to run its last race, which I think was just a tragic send-off to LMP1. Let's see, I still have doubts about Corvette doing a GT3 car. The only reason I have doubts is the Cadillac ATS VR and Pirelli World Challenge. They never allowed the car to be run in privateer hands. That is one thing about GM, is that for all that they do right, GM does privateer racing really poor. And I don't have a problem saying that. You know, maybe they do all right with GT4 cars. Actually, I think they pulled their GT4 cars too, didn't they?
They did, I believe.
They did. But yeah, they don't, because I think Corvette, what they do, and this was a thing actually. So you may remember that Callaway, which was a German sort of aftermarket Corvette parts maker, who basically built modified Corvettes. I believe they were German. Don't quote me on that, but I'm like 90% sure. Irrelevant. Anyway, they made a Corvette C7 GT3 car. This was not made in-house by Chevrolet. It wasn't a Pratt & Miller associated thing. It was Callaway. And they went out and they ran in the ADAC GT Masters, and they ran it for a couple of races in Pirelli after the Cadillac left. It's important to say that it was after the Cadillac left because GM didn't actually want that car competing in Pirelli World Challenge while the Cadillac was there. They didn't want the car competing alongside GM's factory efforts, if you will. And the other thing that I heard about that car is that GM didn't want it sold to any IMSA GTD teams. Even though it was a GT3 car, it would have been legal in the Rolex 24 if you wanted to see a Callaway C7R, or no, sorry, not C7R, Callaway C7 GT3, which probably would have been a fan favorite among most people. GM didn't want to allow it because they didn't want a privateer team representing Corvette alongside Corvette racing, which to me, it's like, okay, if you can't tell the difference between a privateer Corvette and the factory Corvette, which are notably I was going to say the C7Rs at the time were like the bright yellow cars. If you can't tell the difference between what's factory and what's not, then I don't know. I never understood why they were on that side of the fence, because I think that pretty much would have been free exposure for them. Let's see. David said IMSA, I'm not going to quote exactly, but David said IMSA will allow whatever Corvette wants. I think that he's accurate in saying that. I brought up a couple of weeks ago to Kyle, actually, that to me there are two classes of IMSA fans. There are IMSA fans, and then there are Corvette fans, which I keep them separate because I think that the Corvette fan, while they may be a fan of the IMSA Championship and they may follow it loosely for the other classes, they are primarily there because they want to watch the factory Corvettes. And I have no problem with it. If that's why you want to watch the series and that's why you want to attend races, power to you. I have no problem with that. But there is certainly a fan base within IMSA that is primarily a Corvette fan. And that's 95% of the reason why they're watching the races and why they're going to the races. So if IMSA were to lose Corvette racing, I don't know an exact number, but I'm sure you'd lose up to a third, maybe more, of your fan base.
I would say it'd be a majority
going to the races. I mean, look how large the Corvette corrals are. That's all I need to say.
Pretty much every race.
Yeah, but so yeah, I mean, I think he's right in saying that IMSA will pretty much follow suit with whatever Corvette does. I really hope Corvette does make a GT3 car, because that could be really a game changer in the worldwide scheme of pro GT racing. They will be allowed a special. So I assume David was talking about, like, IMSA would allow Corvette as a GTE car in a GT3 base class. I'm assuming if they modified it. I don't know. I don't work for IMSA management, but it's possible. If it was between that and Corvette saying we're going to pull out, yeah, they'd probably allow it. But the reason... when Callaway is the only reason a GT3 car or a GT Corvette existed was pretty sad. Yeah, I agree. I mean, GM's focus factory-wise obviously was just on the C7R at the time when they killed the ATS VR Cadillac GT3 program. But yeah, I do think that they should have gone down that route at some point, because there are just so many races where you can run a Corvette GT3 car and where it would pull a ton of fan attention. So I think it was maybe a missed opportunity, but we'll see if they go back on that in the future. Should GT3 go to GTE spec, making GT3 cars faster instead of GTE moving to GT3? That's a good question. I would say no, because if you take GT3 cars and you try to speed them up, and this is why I use the analogy of the DPs being sped up to meet LMP2 speeds, you're driving up costs. It's more expensive to make a car faster than to make one slower, obviously. So I think the way of doing it would be to take the GTE cars and slow them down a little bit. Maybe that would be sort of not a double-edged sword, but a kill two birds with one stone sort of thing. If we're going to stick down the LMP3 route, then maybe we won't have to have LMP3 cars mixed in with the top class GTs at Daytona. Still trying to read through a few of these. The Callaway is a different nose as well. As opposed to what? The C7R? Yeah. Y'all bring up Corvette fans. All the Corvette fans left when they went to mid-engine. That is not true. maybe a couple of them left, but certainly that is not correct in the slightest. Go look at the... well, actually, the IMSA corrals. The Corvette corrals aren't packed right now because of COVID, but... just wait until the pandemic's over, and I'm sure I'll be flipped on that. What's wrong with IMSA? What's wrong with IMSA that Glickenhaus doesn't come race? Well, they're not eligible right now. And that's the same problem with Toyota not being able to come over and run Daytona. And if you're going to take the effort to go and balance LMH and LMDH cars, then I think you should make him eligible. If you're going to do convergence, go all the way. Don't half-ass convergence, because if they do that, if they end up actually doing that, where it's convergence is a one-way street and you can't go both ways, then I'd be scared about if they try to do a GT convergence, because then what are you going to say? Oh, you can take the modified Corvette, which has been downgraded to GT3 spec, and you can race it, at Le Mans, or you can race it at like Daytona in a GT3 base class, but you can't go race it at Bathurst, or you can't go race it at the Nürburgring. Convergence needs to be a two-way street if you really want to be appealing to the manufacturers.
Yeah, that's why earlier when you said GT convergence, I said knock on wood, because we still don't know yet whether convergence for prototypes is a two-way street.
Yeah.
Because we know IMSA, the LMDH, will be allowed to go to Le Mans, but we don't know whether Hypercar will be able to come to Daytona. And if they're going to be, yeah, you're right. I mean, if they're going to be like balanced to race Le Mans, then why can't they come to Daytona? It'd be so stupid if they do not come to Daytona. It just it make me so mad. IMSA will have gotten boned if that happens, and I will be so mad. Because the thing is, it's pretty much up to the ACO the way I see it. Because obviously IMSA's down with convergence because they can get all these because LMDH, I believe, correct me on this, but LMDH is cheaper than Hypercar.
Yes.
Right?
By a lot.
So they can have all these manufacturers come to LMDH and, hey, you can come run the IMSA season, but you can also run Le Mans. So they're going to have all this manufacturer interest to come to LMDH, which we've seen, because they can go to Le Mans way cheaper. And that's IMSA's ticket. That's how they're going to get more prototype entries in their new regulation. The ACO, I mean, do they care if Hypercar goes and runs a Daytona or not? I mean, this is the way I see it.
I don't actually know who has an issue with it, to be honest with you. That's something I'd have to look more into. But yeah, certainly it has to be a two-way street. If you really want to be appealing to manufacturers, there's no reason to not make it that, unless you're really focused on politics over actually how competitive and strong a class could be, which unfortunately is how racing is generally going right now. while we're talking about sports cars, I want to talk about our last thing on sports cars before we hop over to another series. Is Le Mans Hydrogen got an update today with Red Bull Advanced Technologies and Orica teaming up to develop a hydrogen prototype chassis. Now, if you're not too familiar, which honestly even I wasn't too familiar about the nuts and bolts about the Le Mans Hydrogen class, what their plans were for it, and that's right, Le Mans Hydrogen class. So the initial plan right now, from what I've seen, is that they want to make a separate class that Le Mans Hydrogen cars can race in. So here's what we know right now is that, as I said, Red Bull Advanced Technologies and Orica would be teaming up to make the chassis. Now, I don't know what their plans for the class would be. I don't know if they would try to do an LMDH/DPi route where they allow manufactured bodywork or something. But what I can already say is that I have a slight problem with the idea of it being a separate class. First of all, let me just say that they want the class to start in 2024. 24 Hours of Le Mans for the first time. So I don't really have... I shouldn't say it's a huge issue, but this is where I said if you want to go on convergence, go all in on convergence. If you want to go in on hydrogen, go all in on hydrogen. I think that you could be encouraging manufacturers to go down this route. You could make it legal in the top class. And I know BMW has expressed interest in hydrogen in the past. Tell them, yeah, you know what, we'll let you race in the top class. Now, granted, what they're probably doing right now is they're probably trying to... It's really just one big tech demo. They want to see how everything works and how if it can properly work. I know the technology probably isn't quite there yet for them to be running competitive lap times, but the idea of an entire separate class of competitive entries, because I know Garage 56 has been a thing in the past as well, and I've actually been a pretty big fan of Garage 56. But to me, I don't know how well that idea would do as a competitive class on its own, rather than one car proving the technology. I don't know if you have any opinions on that, but I think there's just something about it to me that it's sort of like, okay, well, we're going to do hydrogen, but we're not going to go all the way. And I hope they do find a way to incorporate it into the top class down the road, but from the looks of it right now, it doesn't seem like that's their intentions.
Yeah, I don't think it should be a separate class. It is honestly really cool to me seeing, newer technology, different technology being implemented in WEC, in Le Mans. I think that's very cool because at this point, when you look at, hybrid, obviously it's done in different ways, but at this point, it's done in so many different racing series. I think it's very important for Le Mans to be looking forward at something like hydrogen that's different from what anyone else is doing, because honestly, that's honestly the spirit of sports car racing to me, is just testing new technology. And I think it's very important. And I was very happy to see the articles this morning come out with Red Bull Advanced Technologies and Orica winning the bid. And yeah, I think it's honestly, it's very nice to see. I enjoy that. But the way they go about it, I don't know, that's kind of with you on that.
Well, actually, I can tell you the exact problem I have with it, because alongside Red Bull Advanced Technologies and Orica, they're going to be using Plastic Omnium, which is a hydrogen. They're another, maker in the hydrogen auto sector. They're going to be going to them for the hydrogen fuel tank. Now, to me right there, you already have a few spec parts, and what I don't want is I don't want a class that's so driven and so inspired by modern and futuristic technology even to be too far spec.
Yeah.
Because spec works if you're really trying to keep car counts up there and you're really trying to keep costs down. But I don't want to see it in a technology-driven class. I think if you go down that route, you're almost looking like a Formula E clone. And I have other problems with Formula E other than the fact that it's, too heavily spec in right now. But I just don't want it to go too far spec right now. I'm sure they're doing it to keep costs down, because I'm not so sure you're going to attract that many manufacturers right now with that idea. You might attract some smaller EV projects in towards it, but I don't know if you're going to get the big name brands like BMW to commit to something like that. We'll have to see.
Well, I definitely think the manufacturers will be looking at it and they'll definitely be interested.
Oh, for sure they'll be
So
interested,
it's just,
but I don't
it
know if they're
depends
going
on
to be
the way they
running
go
it.
about it. Because if they start out using, some spec parts and just kind of prove that, it can be done, and they continue to learn what they're doing and how to improve it, I'm sure the manufacturers will come, because that's what the future, if that it for is that for certain is what the future is going to be in the auto industry. I guarantee manufacturers will be looking at what Red Bull's doing and what they're doing, and hopefully join. I think that's their mindset of trying to get manufacturers here. Is just
Right.
let's have these guys make a car, have it work, start a class race, and then, because they did mention that there are manufacturers already looking at it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll keep you updated with any updates that we hear about that hydrogen class. Again, it's not supposed to be implemented until 2024, but I'm sure we will get some more news about that in the coming months. I said that was the last thing for sports cars. One more thing real quick, because I forgot to go back to it, is Glickenhaus with their 007 Le Mans hypercar. They were supposed to be skipping the opening round of the World Endurance Championship at Sebring, and sure enough, that race got axed, as I kind of predicted it would. And the new opening round of the World Endurance Championship for this season is the 8 Hours of Portimao in Portugal. So what that means is that Glickenhaus is back on the table for a couple of reasons. Number one, that race got moved back a couple of weeks from the middle of March to the beginning of April. And number two, despite Glickenhaus being an American-based manufacturer, that car is not being built in America. It's being built by Podium Technologies in Italy. So the logistics of them, and I heard Jim Glickenhaus say this as well, and I first of all, I love Jim Glickenhaus's transparency. I think it's so refreshing, albeit a little bit weird, to have somebody be that transparent in a class that's so almost secretive as LMP1 used to be. Obviously, Hypercar is the successor to LMP1, but I just love the idea of it. I love the idea of somebody like Jim Glickenhaus saying, all right, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and go build a Le Mans hypercar when everybody told him he wouldn't do it. Anyways, so he's been saying, or he was saying from the start, that they didn't expect Sebring to actually go ahead and happen because of the whole logistics with the pandemic. And the first race now being in Europe means that it's much easier for them to make it there, and they have a couple of extra weeks to get the car on track and tested. So I'm glad to see them there for that first race. At least means that they'll have a shot at contesting Toyota for the championship. We'll have to see how their pace goes. And they announced Ryan Briscoe and Gustavo Menezes as their first two drivers for that car. So some good news coming from Glickenhaus, which is really good, I think. Some people, actually a lot of people, were doubting them. And I'm glad to see that they're actually sort of putting down those doubts. Anything for you to add on that, or not really? Because we can move it on.
I mean, not really.
All right.
Did you, so explain, really, like, from what you said, they weren't going to make it to Sebring. You told me this a couple of weeks ago, but they weren't going to make it to Sebring because didn't Portimao also, like, didn't the race also move back like a week or two?
Yeah, that moved back 2 weeks, I think. 2 or 3 weeks.
Well,
maybe 3.
The car actually wasn't going to be ready.
Right.
And they didn't want what was news to me, and I might just be stupid for not hearing this, but they can't. I don't know if this is I don't like this, but when for the first race at Sebring, if they were to have rushed building the car and show up at Sebring, then they'd be stuck with it for that season. Correct?
Yes, they would be stuck with the with their homologation for that season at
Yeah.
least, yes. Which that's the thing is LMP1, you bring a car and it was terrible. Oh, we'll just upgrade it. We'll put a new aero package on it. Well, if you watch my latest video, actually I didn't really specify that they couldn't upgrade it throughout the season, but I did say that it's much more hunkered down on what you actually can do. And so yeah, if Glickenhaus made a car and it's terrible, and you can say, oh, well, BOP will just save you. Well, BOP can only save you so much. You're not gonna, put a piece of crap on track and just get the Toyota slowed to match it. You
Well,
still
in hypercars, is it actually BOP now, or is it still EOT?
no, it's BOP.
Okay.
So yeah, what their initial plan was, all right, we're not going to do Sebring. Instead, we're going to spend extra time running tests on the car, putting the car on track, running some laps before we go get it homologated by the ACO, where we're locked into it. We're locked into the design and we can't touch it. So I think that was a smart decision on them. And now they just get an extra couple of weeks. And I think that not having to ship that car to America is a lot of time saved, where they can just pretty much drive it on a truck over from Italy to Portugal and save quite a bit of time there and use that extra time to go testing on track. So I think it's an overall win, except for everybody who's planning on going to Sebring. Sorry, Kyle and David. And everybody else who's trying to go.
I was excited to see Hypercar's debut. That sucks.
You were getting a bit cocky too. Yeah, you were getting cocky because you were like, "Oh, I'm gonna get to see Hypercar's first race," and I was like, "No, you're not."
I was already really sad. First of all, I've at this point I was supposed to go to Sebring twice. There's been 2 times where I've been supposed to go to Sebring, and then the week before it was like, okay, it's not happening. But the first time I'm still sore about, because that was my last chance to see an LMP1 hybrid in person. Last chance. And it's never going to happen again. And I was actually kind of hoping, well, not really hoping, but I kind of thought for a long time that Hypercar was going to get delayed and they were going to be running LMP1 this year at Sebring now. So yeah, I never got to see LMP1 hybrids, and I don't get to see Hypercar's first race. So someday I'll go to Sebring. Hopefully it's in a couple months, and someday I'll see WEC in person. So sad.
Just come with me to the 2023 24 Hours of Le Mans.
I'll try.
Yes. All right, let's move it on. I think we're going to just do one thing on IndyCar. This has been a rather long episode.
There's one pretty solidly big
I
news
hope
item
David
this
is still here so we can I don't know the expression for this one, but sort of kick the ball around about IndyCar's new streaming deal. But IndyCar, so last year their practice qualifying and Indy Lights, before Indy Lights got canned, was on NBC Sports Gold, and NBC has made the decision, alongside a couple of other things in the past week, to move that to Peacock, which is their in-house streaming service that has quite a few things now. It has like original programming, movies and stuff. You're probably familiar with this if you're in the United States. For those who aren't, Peacock is basically NBC Universal's streaming service. Like I said, they have TV shows, movies, and some live sports. So they announced today that they were moving the practice qualifying and Indy Lights, all that content that was on Gold, they're moving it over to Peacock. And there have been some critics of it. One of them may be hanging out in the chat still. We'll see. But I think overall it's a positive, at least from where we were. At least it's certainly better than Gold. I don't remember exactly how much NBC Sports Gold was. It's like in the realm of $60 a year, I think.
Wasn't it 50? I don't know.
It might have been 50. Well, okay, so they did like the discounted season stuff halfway through. Like I know I got it before the Indy 500 to watch practice, and it was maybe $30 or $25 or something. But I thought it was 50 or 60, something like that. Peacock is $5 a month for ad-free and $10 a month for... $5 a month for ad-supported and $10 a month for ad-free. Which those ads, I'm pretty sure only apply to the like on-demand programming, like The Office or whatever. I don't think it has a difference for the actual live sports. So anyway, that stuff is now moved to Peacock. I think it's a net positive because there are a few advantages to Peacock compared to NBC Sports Gold. Number one, I think the biggest one is that you can get it on a month-by-month deal, and that was my biggest gripe with the NBC Sports Gold plan, was that if you wanted it, you had to get it for the entire season. And I hated that because most of the time I wasn't able to even watch IndyCar practice or qualifying. I'd be too caught up with work or something. And so I'd be too caught up with that to actually even be able to watch. I bought the gold plan to go watch Indy 500 practice, and that was it.
It was necessary last year.
It was necessary, yeah. Got kind
They gave the IMS ticket holders for the race a whopping like 25% or something.
Yeah, something like that. But I think the ability to get on a month-by-month basis is number one. I think that's the biggest pro. And I'm not trying to like sell their service here or anything, because there are certainly some better alternatives that could have been had. I know Kyle's brought up how IndyCar used to stream practice and qualifying, at least when qualifying was on, or at least when the race was on an ABC network. They would do practice and qualifying on YouTube through IMS Productions.
Yeah, and people could watch it free all around
Absolutely,
the world.
yep.
Around the world. The world.
That's the biggest thing right now. The biggest downside is the international rights, which is just appalling. Which we'll get into that in a second.
The fact they don't even you can stream it on YouTube still for the European guys, right? Worldwide, you can stream it. You can geo-block it on YouTube. Give it to them for free. That's the exposure you need. That's the exposure you want. Remember because Fernando Alonso coming and racing the 500, it's a big deal for everyone around the world. That makes them want to watch the Indy 500. So you know what you do?
Right.
You give them the easiest. You just you make it the easiest that you can for them to watch it. You know what they're not doing? Making it easy for them to watch it. It's annoying. And it used to be easy. It'd be one thing if they never made if it's always been this way. It's like, oh, it's how it's always been. It's stupid, but it is what it is. It's what they've always done. But we were like, little do we know that that we were living in a great time when everything was free on YouTube to watch all the practice and qualifying sessions. You had the IndyCar radio broadcast, and you say the number one argument to go to the streaming services I always hear is that the quality of broadcasts went up. You get the graphics on stream, the actual NBC commentators, it's more in depth. It's just it was just better produced because it's done by NBC, of course. Well, IndyCar has this thing that they pay for, that they have on it's their thing. It's called IMS Productions, and the content that IMS Productions does is actually pretty good, but they underutilize the hell out of them. They really do, and it's sad to see. And then on top of that, you think about the IndyCar Radio Network. That's a great group of guys. They are great at what they do, and I want to. How many people? This is one thing I'd have to ask is how many people that have just started watching IndyCar, or how long were you watching IndyCar until you realized that IndyCar had a radio network? That's the honest question that I want to ask. It's underutilized. You have all these things that you pay for and that you have under your wing, and you're not utilizing them the right way. And then you go to NBC and you sign off your streaming rights exclusively to NBC. So then now at this point, once you've signed that contract, you're kind of put in a box because NBC they own all the streaming rights. And it's annoying. Now, you're right. Going to Peacock is a net positive over Gold, which, sure, okay, it's better than Gold. But how good was Gold? It's one of those things. I got less mad about it, sure, when I found out that I could also watch The Office on Peacock. Sure. You also get Supercross. IMSA got boned, by the way. Point that out. You get these things. Peacock's, it's a net positive, okay? It's cheaper month by month. But when you look at the future, because the big news that came out this week before they announced that they were going to Peacock for the streaming service instead of Gold was that NBCSN is actually going to be shutting down at the end of this year. NBC's their sports network, the NBC Sports Network, and that's a big deal because obviously IndyCar has, I don't know what the exact number of races they have on network TV. When it's not network TV, it's on NBCSN. They have like one race on USA Network. That's it. So at that point, then you think, where would the NBCSN races go? And then you start thinking about new TV contracts. The other thing, because NASCAR already announced that their races on NBCSN would go to USA Network, but NASCAR is in they're still in contract after this year, but IndyCar is not. So all the discussion starts to, go around because IndyCar's in a contract year on their TV deal. So then you start thinking, if they don't have NBCSN to bank off of next year, if they were to re-sign with NBC, and you only have so many of your races on NBC, then you start to get worried about what if they just start doing exclusive streams for the races on Peacock if they were to do that. Because I almost can guarantee every single race that's an NBCSN would not just go to the NBC network or network. So that's the thing to think about. That's kind of where we're at, and that's why the discussion is so hot right now, because it's just, you start to think about what IndyCar is going to do. And the one good thing about that is big brain Mark Miles only signing, the NBC, when did Gold start? That was 2019, right?
The beginning of their new TV deal, which was when 2019.
Yeah, the 18,500. So yeah, big brain Mark Miles for only signing a 2-year contract with NBC, because I remember he specifically said that the future of live sports is on these streaming networks, and and they were like throwing out names like Netflix and Hulu, just like all sports have done, obviously. But you start to worry. I'm worried that they're just going to start putting races on Peacock, and then obviously your existing fans will likely pay for that to watch the races. But when you're a series like IndyCar, like if NASCAR were to go do races on Peacock, I'm sure that would do fine. That'd be fine for them, whatever. But IndyCar, when you're trying to grow from the many things that have happened in the past, and you're still small, you look at the TV ratings. Why just putting your races and just content in general behind a paywall just is not the move. What you need to do is be putting your product in front of, you need to make it as easy to access as you can to everybody, every single person who has access to a computer, to a TV. You need to just make it as accessible as possible to people, not putting it exclusively on Peacock that you have to pay for, this streaming service, that. I'm fine with it being on a streaming service. Like if IndyCar were to, do whatever they do with the TV contract. I haven't even talked about what they would do TV wise, but streaming wise, if they were to put in their contract or have a deal with someone like Hulu, our races will also be on here, because that's what the NFL does.
Right, NFL does that with Amazon. I was going to bring that up.
Because you can watch the games on Amazon, or you can watch it on live television. I'm fine with that. That's perfect, but just going to streaming only on these races is it's stupid. It's not the way to go. And even if you don't want to just go free on YouTube, because obviously the reason IndyCar wouldn't want to go free to YouTube for practice and qualifying, and I think they this was definitely contributing to the Gold, was they saw that if they put practice and qualifying behind a paywall, then they can make money off of it, more money than they would make off YouTube. But again, we were trying to grow the sport and get more fans. That's not the way to go.
Well, that's not really IndyCar making money. That's NBC making money. Which you got to think into the negotiating.
Who do you think IndyCar gets money from?
Well, okay, but look into the negotiating tactics between these TV stations and the series, I'm sure it went something along the lines of, yeah, we'll put an extra race or two on Network NBC if you let us handle the streaming. And if you're IndyCar, you're going to say, oh, 2 races on Network NBC. That sounds pretty good. And at the time, they really didn't have, well, I'll just say they didn't really have a strong media department. I think you'll agree with me on that. And I don't think IndyCar is the most media conscious series right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, to them, it's like, okay, you're going to give us 2 races. Again, this is me speculating. I don't know anything about this, but I'm sure that probably went something along those lines. There was another thing I was going to say about streaming. I completely forgot what it was. Alberto Sanchez said, I think IndyCar should just stream the races on YouTube, SRO, GT, or any race around the globe is free to watch. They're not in a position to do that because
they should do that worldwide to international. It'd be 1,000 times better than what they're doing now. What they're doing now is just atrocious.
Here's what I will say. Well, they can't do that here because the market for IndyCar here is simply too large to just be handing it away for free. As many people as you get 1 million people on a YouTube stream, it's still not going to be, really where the series should be, at least in the United States. But any international market, and we were talking about this earlier, any international market where IndyCar does not have a TV contract should be giving fans a legal, and even if it's not easy, they should be giving them a legal way to watch coverage. Because, I was talking to Drayton, who's from the Bahamas, and he'll tell me that, it's, when it comes to certain series, we just kind of get screwed. There's nothing we can watch it on legal or, their pretty much only resort is to watch it on some third-party stream. And the series isn't making anything from that. They're not even getting, ratings from that. So it doesn't really help them at all. Any series right now, and I think the best series to look after for this, if you want to take two examples out of the book, would be F1 and Formula E. The problem is that IndyCar doesn't have the negotiating power that F1 does. When F1 said, we're going to launch our own streaming service, and NBC said, okay, we're not going to broadcast you if you're going to do your own streaming service and not let us handle it. F1 just said, okay, bye. Because F1's bigger than NBC. They don't need to deal with NBC. They just said, fine, we'll go to ESPN. They didn't care. But IndyCar is, unfortunately, not in a similar position because they don't have as much attention. Maybe domestic they do, compared to Formula One in the United States, but they don't have as much negotiating power on the worldwide scheme of things as Formula One, not even close. But at the very minimum, when IndyCar redoes this TV deal, when they think of what they're going to do next, they need to have a legal way for international viewers who right now have nothing to watch races, because that's the biggest complaint I've seen right now. I don't have a problem with paying $5 a month to watch Peacock. Or even, well, no, I did have a problem with paying $50 or $60 a year to watch Gold. I didn't think it was a great use of money. But $5 a month for Peacock's fine. And the other argument I have, if you're going to keep it to practice and qualifying, how many people who aren't really diehard fans are really going to sit back and watch practice and qualifying? Probably not many. Maybe you'd get somebody who's flipping channels and they see that IndyCar qualifying is on and they'll say, oh, I'll watch this. But the majority of people who are watching practice and qualifying are dedicated fans.
Not to mention, it should be said that they are also absolutely bending over lights by putting them behind a paywall as well.
Right. I mean, that could even, because I'm sure there's probably a trickle-down effect where it's harder for drivers to get and teams to get sponsorship because they're not being exposed to as large an audience as they really could be. I'm not sure, because it's not, I don't think lights was really getting, the biggest lights race of the year is really the Freedom 100. Which,
look what they did to that.
Yeah.
Genius.
That's a separate topic, yeah. But yeah, lights was probably better on YouTube. It was definitely better on YouTube because you got people who would just watch it just out of boredom. And you got way more viewers for that than I think they would on a paid streaming service. But what was the other thing? So the races going to streaming exclusively is, I think, it's going to be dependent on the markets themselves, because NBC right now looks like they're in a transitional period. They look to be in a huge transitional period with sports, where it seems like they're trying. If your name isn't the NFL or NASCAR, they're pretty much just trying to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like the NHL even may be trying to leave NBC, which would be a huge thing because they're really. I'm pretty sure the NHL is exclusive to NBC right now, and so it's going to really depend what happens. The unfortunate thing that I was thinking about while you were talking is that any TV network, when they try something radical and new, if they are going to try, let's put some races on streaming exclusively, they're going to do it with a guinea pig series first. And in the state of NBC right now, let's say NBC was looking for a guinea pig right now to try it on, they'd probably try it on IMSA, honestly. And they have done streaming only with IMSA, at least in terms of live. They did it numerous times, and people hate it.
Yeah, they haven't said a word about Track Pass, have they?
No.
See, it's a different topic, because if you're IMSA, then heck yeah, you'd like get qualifying whatever you can on Peacock. Just make sure the races stay on TV, but just
Right.
if you're IMSA, get whatever content you can on Peacock. For IndyCar,
Well, actually,
no.
IMSA does it right. No, but IMSA does it right too, as well, because IMSA, if you live in like the qualifying race, I couldn't watch the qualifying race on IMSA TV, and I can't watch the Rolex on IMSA TV. But if I lived in, let's say I lived in Colombia. I'm assuming Colombia doesn't have an IMSA TV contract. I could. Or if I lived in the Bahamas, I could watch it on IMSA TV, no problem. And they're giving me an easy solution to watch a series because no TV markets around me are doing it. So I think that's fine. I think IMSA does a pretty good job of that right now. The problem is for the races, they're really allowing NBC to do whatever they want, where NBC can say, yeah, we're going to throw it on streaming only, but you still need to be a subscriber to NBCSN to even watch it, or a subscriber to Track Pass.
See, when you're a series and you have things like IMSA TV, IMS Productions, which, by the way, I know the answer to this, but when you have those things, it begs the question, it's just like, why not start your own like service? You know, why not? I mean,
It's way too much of a.
I mean, I know
of a
the
thing
answer
to do,
why.
I
It's
think.
because, like you said, with F1, is you start your own streaming service, and NBC is like, well, I don't want you to do that. I want to stream it. And then F1's like, all right, bye. Bye,
Exactly.
Felicia. No, we can do whatever we were. This is going to be more, this is going to be better. But like if you're IndyCar, you have IMS Productions. One thing that's interesting I noticed, which kind of relates to this, is I think that was announced today or yesterday, but the WWE had the WWE Network, which was their own streaming service where they put you can watch the pay-per-views on there. It's a monthly subscription, whatever, all that stuff. And they actually are going to end that and also move to Peacock. So they kind of, because my thought was I was IndyCar. Why don't you just start your own service to put the practice and qualifyings on and do your own thing? You have IMS Productions, you have the radio network, you have all these things. You could do it yourself. Just put a little bit more money into these things and you could do it. And the WWE network kind of showed that they already tried the streaming service thing, and now they're moving to Peacock, which is interesting. I'm not sure the details on why they were doing that, but F1 TV has obviously proven a success. F1 TV is freaking awesome. I mean, imagine a service where if you're a hardcore IndyCar fan, you could pay, say, like $5 and get all the extra features. But if you're just, a new fan or someone who wants to watch IndyCar, you go here and they have, like the practice and qualifyings and lights and the feeder series for free, and then if you're, hardcore, maybe have like some extra shows or some replays or like some, I don't know, just some extra content if you're a big fan, that would be my idea and my thought of a way to do that. If you don't just want to put it on YouTube, which they probably should, but that was my thought. You have the tools to do it, and you're just underutilizing them completely, and it's annoying.
I think the last thing I'll say on this topic is that IndyCar's next media deal whatever they negotiate, it's probably going to be the most influential one and the most important one that they probably would have ever made. Because whether you like it or not, TV media right now is in the middle of a complete revolution. And you notice all these different media companies are coming out with streaming services. NBC did it with Peacock. Discovery just did it with their own thing. Look down the list here. ESPN has their own streaming service. Disney has like
3.
Service.
Disney owns 3.
Yeah. Amazon, Netflix, every single, and I'm talking like even the TV channels themselves. Motor Trend has their own streaming service.
I mean, you
now.
could count in YouTube TV.
Well, YouTube TV is streaming of cable, but the thing is, cable TV itself.
Aren't there YouTube TV exclusives?
No, you're thinking of YouTube Premium.
Oh,
but cable TV itself is in the middle of a transitional period where people are dropping cable left and right, and they're jumping to streaming services. And if IndyCar negotiates a TV deal, as they're expected to be doing later in the year, right? What I would say that they should probably try to do is keep it a short-term deal, as short as you physically can, because the streaming and the whole media market right now for TV is extremely volatile. Where you can sign a 10-year deal with cable. Like their last deal was like 10 years, wasn't it? Because they signed that deal when Versus was a thing, and I think it was a 10-year deal that lasted until 2018, where ABC got the exclusive network TV rights. I don't think you can afford to do another one of those right now, because everything is just in the middle right now of transitioning. So what I can say with full confidence is that streaming is the future. And at some point, they are likely going to be streaming races, and streaming races exclusively on some streaming service. Because at some point, I think a cable network is just going to drop it all together, like we see with NBC right now. Who's going to be next? Because that's another thing, is when one market decides, or one company decides we're done with this, somebody's going to follow.
ESPN, I would say, is probably on its last leg on cable. I would have to say.
Yeah, I mean, you could be right. And I just think IndyCar right now is going to have to be very careful. If you can sign another 2-year deal where you can keep it, I mean, at the worst case scenario, everybody's drops cable and you're not stuck with that deal for long. I think that's what they got to do. But
that's the one thing where Mark Miles really went big brain, was and they're kind of ahead of the game, because let me tell you this: NASCAR signed their TV deal with NBC, and they actually signed it like way in advance. They signed that in like 2013, that it was going to be starting in 2015, like a almost $5 billion deal, and it's a 10-year deal in 2015. So they're stuck until 2025. And obviously now with NBC Ascend going away, like I said, they've already announced that races are going to USA, because they strictly put in that contract that their races cannot be exclusively streamed. Like, races cannot be exclusively streamed. So they're going to be stuck on USA when they're not on the big NBC. And we see these things already happening. Yeah, we see these things already happening now in 2021, and they still have all the way to go to 2025. And a few years from now, who knows where they're going to be sitting? They're in this. They're stuck in this. They're stuck.
IndyCar has 2 routes they could really go down then. They could stick with what they have right now, which is let the TV network decide the majority of how we handle our media, or they could pull an F1 where they decide, okay, we're gonna sell, at least in the United States, we're gonna sell our TV rights to a network for real cheap, because I think they sold the F1 rights in the United States to ESPN for like next to nothing, and we're gonna do our own streaming service. IndyCar could do that, for the future. They could try to sell their TV rights for next to nothing, and put a focus on their own in-house streaming service, which that could be an interesting thing as well, because if you have your own streaming service, you control everything. You don't get told, oh, this race is going to be on this network, this one's going to be on this network. You can control what is on what service and when it's there. Which, right now, if they're looking for control in the market that's changing every single week, I think that could be a good play as well. At least they'll get the.
If you're undecided on getting Peacock, just think about The Office, man. I mean, I don't know where that's the question. I mean, that's the big question is, obviously I wouldn't want the races to be exclusively on Peacock, but when you go that route and you still want, the rights on, you still want it to be on cable, because obviously I don't think right now is the time, or even next year, I don't think it's the right time, and especially IndyCar, to just go strictly to streaming.
I don't either.
I don't think it's the right time years from now, which is why they need to keep doing short deals. But I mean, honestly, when you look at, David just said in the chat, F1 sold the ESPN rights for $1. ESPN got F1 for $1. Remember that? I remember hearing that.
Yeah, that's why there's no commercials.
Yeah. So IndyCar could do that, sell it to CBS for, a pat on the back and the ham sandwich, and, go do your own streaming thing. I don't know. Or the rest could be, I mean, because then at that point, okay, it gets, see, I mean, there's a lot to think about, and they're going to have to be really careful about what they do. And it's, like you said, it's very important as well.
You know what, though? Come to think of it, that the only exception is the Indy 500. That's the only exception. If they fit into a clause, okay, the Indy 500 has to be on network TV, then I think they could get away with something like what F1 did. It would be a gamble. It would be a huge gamble, because the majority of IndyCar's viewers are not going to jump to streaming right now, I don't think. But if you were able to sell the rights really cheap to some cable TV company or some network company like CBS or something down the road, or even renegotiate with NBC, where you say, yeah, we'll give you the rights to to put it on TV for next to nothing. Go put it on whatever network you want, because we're going to do our own streaming thing. I don't think NBC would agree with it, because they already didn't with F1. But maybe somebody like CBS could become a player in that. If they did something like that, though, like I said, it would be a huge risk. But they would control 100% of the streaming game. They could price it at whatever they want. And
think about, they're also, oh, go ahead.
And it would still be on TV for people who aren't ready to jump ship yet.
If you think about it, they're also put in a spot where, I mean, if, let's say NASCAR was in the same situation as they were, if NASCAR were to choose to go on to Peacock and have some races be exclusive there and go streaming and go that route, then I think for IndyCar it would make the decision a little bit easier, because right now, like you said, I'm kind of with you. I don't think a lot of people are going to, pay for Peacock just to watch IndyCar races. I don't think that's going to happen unless you're a diehard fan. You're not going to get any new fans buying it just to watch IndyCar to check it out. But if NASCAR were to go to Peacock, because I think NASCAR is in a position where they could do this, then if IndyCar were to follow them to Peacock, then you would be getting the NASCAR crowd, who then by getting Peacock they also would be able to watch IndyCar. And you could also draw from that crowd as well. Because being the only motor racing series right now to be in the spot of going to Peacock exclusively and not being on cable for some races of the season, whatever that may be, then you're put in a tough spot, because you have until 2025 until NASCAR does whatever they do, which, I mean, NASCAR is not in a good spot either with this, I have to say. So, I mean,
at the time, NASCAR does have way more negotiating power, though, significantly more.
But one thing I heard is, like I said, they signed that almost $5 billion deal. I've been hearing talks like the next contract is going to be even bigger.
It was $5 billion.
$5 billion. Well, that's over 10 years, remember? And I couldn't actually
even that number sounds inflated to me, but maybe I'm wrong.
The number I found I couldn't find a number on IndyCar, how much their deal was, but $5 billion. I'll tell you that $5 billion over 10 years for NASCAR and NBC. Why do you think NASCAR has the money it does, Chris?
Oh, I know. I'm just
Because
there's a difference between
when I said last year when NASCAR was running the race with no fans, the reason they were able to do that is because the tracks don't really benefit as much off the ticket sales as they do the TV. The TV is what makes them all the money, because the TV are the ones who have the money, and that's where NASCAR makes its money pretty much. So IndyCar pretty much, yeah. Yeah, they pretty much rely on they rely more on the tickets than NASCAR does. That's for sure.
Yeah. Last thing I'm going to say here, because we're rolling on a 2-hour episode in a few minutes, is that now that I think about it, this is another advantage of IndyCar actually going to Peacock in terms and comparison to NBC Sports Gold, is that when you have people who are switching over to Peacock, which by the way, there's going to be a ton of people doing that if the WWE network is going there, which it is. You're now giving some. I mean, I know you say nobody's going to go subscribe to Peacock just to watch IndyCar if they're not a big fan, but you have to consider the people who are already subscribed to Peacock because they're watching it for the WWE network, or they're watching it for motocross or whatever. Now there's like all the content that's on streaming services right now is way more concentrated. It's not sort of spread out where you can get lost in everything like it is with cable right now. So you're much more likely to find yourself, I think, watching IndyCar practice or something, especially if you're watching motocross. If you're subscribed to Peacock for something like that, and you say, oh, there's an IndyCar practice on right now, I guess I'll just watch it. So it is sort of a double-edged sword. Yeah, you're losing those people from cable who aren't going to go subscribe just to get practice and qualifying. But to be fair, I'm pretty that was going to be a small market anyways. In IndyCar, with the exception of rare Indy 500 practices and Indy 500 qualifying, has like never had practice and qualifying on TV in recent years. So it isn't.
Qualifying's usually.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I meant practice alone, but qualifying, yes, they did and still do have qualifying on NBCSN sometimes. But
definitely going to have a close eye on what happens internationally, though.
Internationally, they can't screw it up because they're losing way too many fans, especially when you have all this international interest. When you get these drivers, you're like, oh, we've got Alonso coming over again, and
guys, Romain Grosjean's coming in IndyCar and then the coin seat. Guys want to watch? Oh, sorry, you can't.
Yeah, it's they got to figure that out because that's a huge factor, especially if you want to grow your international market, which anybody should be trying to do right now, especially if you're trying to get more races overseas. But that's a whole other topic for another day. Anyway, we're about nearly 2 hours on this episode of the Rain Race Podcast. Hope you enjoyed. Like I said, this is a weekly thing again for as long as I can make it a weekly thing. So next week, we're going to be recapping the Rolex 24 and everything that we can about it. Kyle's going to be there, which means that the episode will hopefully be Monday at 9 p.m., same time, but there's a chance that travel prevents us from doing that. If it's not, you will figure out what time we're doing it first on our Twitter, which is at Rain Race Podcast. The link is in the description. You can also just check out the channel where I'll have the stream up in advance so you know exactly what time to catch it. As always, though, you can catch it on the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all that good stuff. Ask Alexa to play the Rain Race Podcast and she'll do it. Tomorrow, we're putting the episode up tomorrow, so every episode that we do, it will be available on podcasting services everywhere the next day. And you can check us out from there. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are new and you aren't yet, because we're close to 1,000 and I want my community tab. And you can leave a like on that podcast if you enjoyed it. For now, thanks for sticking around with us for this 2 hours. It's been a pleasure having you here, and we'll hope to see you next week. Good.